The Enfranchisement of Women, Part 3. We are not now speaking of cases in which there is anything deserving the name of strong affections on both sides. That where it exists is too powerful a principle not to modify generally the bad influences of the situation. It seldom, however, destroys them entirely. Much often the bad influences are too strong for the affection and destroy it. The highest order of durable and happy attachment would be 100 times more frequent than they are, if the affection which the two sexes sought from one another were that of the genuine friendship, which only exists between equals in privilege as is in faculties. But with regard to what is commonly called affection in married life, the habitual and almost mechanical feeling of kindliness, and pleasure in each other's society, which generally grow up between persons who consequently live together, unless there is actual dislike, there is nothing in this to contradict or qualify the mischievous influence of the unequal relations. Such feeling often exists between a sultan and his favorites, between the master and his servants. They are mere examples of the fallibility of human nature, which accommodated itself in the same, in some degree, even to the worst circumstances, and the commonest nature always the most easily, with respect to the influence of personally exercised by the woman or even man, to no doubt render them less harsh and brutal. In ruder times, it was often the only softening influence to which they were accessible. But the assertion that the wife's influence rendered the man less selfish contain, as things now are, fully as much error as truth. Selfishness towards the wife herself and towards those in whom she is interested, the children, though favored by her dependence, the wife influence no doubt tend to counteract. But the general effect on him of her character, so long as her interests are concentrated in the family, tends to substitute for individual selfishness the family selfishness, wearing an amiable guise and putting on mask of duty. How rarely this is a wife's influence on the side of public virtue. How rarely does it do what otherwise that discourage any effort or principle by which the private interest or worldly vanities of the family, public spirit, sense of duty towards the public good is of all virtue, as women are now educated and situated, as most rarely to be found among them. They have seldom even what in man is often partial substitute for the public spirit, a sense of personal honor connected with any public duty. Many a man whom no money or personal flattery would have brought has bartered his political opinion against or invitations of his own wife, and still greater number are made mere hunters, puerile vanities of society, because their wives value them. As for opinion, in Catholic countries, the wife's influence is another name for that of priest. He gives her, in the hope and emotion connected with the future life, a consolidation for the sufferings and disappointments which are her ordinary lots in his. Elsewhere, her weight is thrown into the scale either of the most commonplace or the most outwardly prosperous opinion, either those by which the sensuous will escape, or by a worldly advancement is likely to be procured. In England, the wife's influence is usually on the liberal and anti-popular side. This is generally the gaining side of personal interest and vanity. And what to her is a democracy or liberalism in which she has no part, which leaves her the pariah it found her. The man himself, when he marries, usually decline into conservatism, begins to sympathize with the holders of power more than with things in his part to be one side of authority, as in mental progress. Except those vulgar attainments by which vanity or ambitions is promoted, there is generally an end to it in man who marries a woman mentally his inferior, unless indeed he is unhappy in marriage and the end become indifferent. From a man of 25 or 30, after he is married, an experienced observer seldom expected any further progress in mind or feeling. It is rare that the progress already made in the maintain any spark or men's demeanor which might otherwise have spread and become a flame, seldom survive by any length of time unextinguished. For a mind which learned to be satisfied with that what is already, which does not necessarily incessantly look forward to the degree of improvement not yet reached, becomes relaxed and self-indulgent, and loses the spring of the tension which maintained it even at the point already attained. And there is no fact in human nature to which experience bear more invariable testimony than to this, that all social or sympathetic influence which do not raise up, pull down, if they do not tend to stimulate and exalt the mind, they tend to vulgarize it. For the interest, therefore, not only of women but for man and human improvement in the widest sense, the emancipation of women, which the modern world often boasts of having effected, and for which credit sometimes given to civilization, sometimes to Christianity, cannot stop where it is. If it were either necessary not just that one portion of mankind should remain mentally and spiritually only half developed, the development of the other portion ought to have been made as far as possible independent of their influence. Instead of this, they have become the most intimate, and it may now be said, the only intimate association of those to whom they yet are sedulously kept inferior, and have been raised just high enough to drag the others down to themselves. We have left behind a host of vulgar objections, either as not worthy of an answer or answered by the general course of our remark. A few words, however, must be said on one plea. Within England is made use of the forgiving and unselfish air to the upholding of selfish privilege, and which with unobserving, unreflective people passes for more than it is worthy. Women, it is said, do not desire, do not seek, and what is called their emancipation. On the contrary, they generally disavow such claim when made on their behalf, and fall with archment upon any of one of themselves to identify herself with their common cause. Supposing the fact to be true in the fullest sense ever asserted, if it proves that European women ought to remain as they are, it proves exactly the same with regard to Asiatic women. For they too, instead of murmuring at their seclusion and restraint imposed upon them, pride themselves on it, and are astonished at the affinity of women who receive visit from male acquaintance and are seen in the streets unveiled. Habits of submission make men as well as women servile-minded. The vast population of Asia do not desire or value, probably would not accept political liberty, nor the savage of the forest civilization, which does not prove that either of these things is undesirable for them, and they will not, at some of the future time, enjoy it. Custom hardens human beings to any kind of degradation by deadening the part of their nature which would resist it. And the case of women in this subject, even peculiar one, no one either inferior caste that we have heard of have been taught to regard the degradation as their honor. The argument, however, implies a secret consciousness that the alleged preference of women for their dependent state is merely apparent and arises from their being allowed no choice. For if the preference be natural, there can be no necessity for enforcing it by law. To make laws compelling people to follow their inclinations has no hitherto been through necessary by any legislation. The plea that women do not desire any change is the same that has been urged time out of mind against the proposal of abolishing any social evil. There is no complaint which is generally not true, when true only so because there is not that hope of success, without which the complaint seldom makes itself audible to the unwilling ears. How does the objectors know that the women do not desire equality and freedom? He never knew a woman who did not or would not desire it herself individually. It would be very simple to suppose that if they do desire it, they will say so. Their position is like that the tenants or laborers who vote against their own political interests to please their landlord or employees, with the unique addition that submission is the inculcated on them from childhood, and the peculiar attraction and grace of their character. They are taught to think that to repel activity, even an admitted injury done to themselves, is somewhat unfeeling, and had better be left to some male friends or protector, to be accused of rebelling against anything which admits of being called an ordinance of society. They are taught to regard as an imputation of the serious offences, to say the least, against the proprieties of the sex. It requires unusual moral courage as well as disinterestedness in a woman to express opinion favorable to woman enfranchisement, until at least there is some prospect of obtaining the comfort of her individual life, and her social consideration usually depend on the goodwill of those who hold the undue power, and to possess the possessors of power. Any complainant, however bitter of the misuse of it, or is less flagrant act of insubordination than to protest against the power itself. The profession of women in this matter remind us of the state of offenders of old, who on the point of execution used to protect their love and devotion to their sovereign, by whose unjust mandate they suffered. Griselda herself might be matched from the speeches to by the Shakespeare into the mouth of male victim of kingly caprice and tyranny, Duke of Buckingham, for example, in Henry VIII, and even wholesale the literary class of women, especially in England, and ostentatious in disclaiming the desire for equality of citizen and proclaiming their complete satisfaction with the place which society assigned to them, exercising in this as in any other respect the most noxious influence over the feeling and opinion of men, who unsuspectingly accept the servilities of Todaism as conscious to the force of truth, not considering that it is personal interest of those women to profess whatever opinion they accept will be agreeable to men. It is not among men of the talent sprung and the people, and patronized and flattered by the aristocracy, that we look the leaders of democratic movement. Successful literary women are just as unlikely to prefer the cause of women to their own special consideration. They depend on men's opinion for their literacy as well as their feminine success, and such is their bad opinion of men. They believe there is no more than in 10,000 who does not like and fear strength, sincerity, or high spirit in a woman. They are therefore anxious to earn pardon and toleration for whatever of these qualities their writings they may exist on other subject, by a studied display of submission on this, and they may give no occasion of vulgar man to say what nothing will prevent vulgar man for saying, that learning makes women unfeminine, and that literary ladies are likely to be bad wives. But enough of this, especially as the fact which affords the occasion of this notice makes it impossible any longer to assert the universal acquiescence of women, saving individual exception in their dependent condition. In the United States at least, there are women seemingly numerous and now recognized for action on the public mind, who demands equality in the fullest acceptance of the word, and demanded by a straightforward appeal to men's sense of justice, not pleased for its with timid deprivation of their displeasure. Like other popular movements, however, this may be seriously retarded by the blunders of this adherent. Tried by the ordinary standard of public meeting, the speeches at the convention are remarkable for the preponderance of the rational over the declamatory element, but there are some exceptions, and timing and things to which it is impossible to attach any rational meaning have found their way into resolution. Thus, the resolution which sets forth the claim made it in behalf of women after claiming equality in education, in the industrial pursuit and political right, enumerates as fourth head of common something under the name of social and spiritual union, medium of expressing the highest moral and spiritual viewers of the justice, with other similar verbiage serving only to mar the simplicity and rationality of the other hands, resembling those who would weakly attempt to combine nominal equality between man and woman with the enforced distinction in their privilege and functions. What is wanted for women is equal right, equal admission to all social privileges, not a position apart as sort of sentimental priesthood. To this, the only just and rational principle, both the resolution and speeches for the most part adhere. They contain so little which is akin to the non-social paragraph in question that we suspect it not to be the work of the same hands as most of the other resolutions. The strength of the cause lies in the support of those who are influenced by reason and principle. To attempt to recommend it by sentimentalities, absurd in reason and consistent with the principle on which the movement is founded, is to please a good cause on level with a bad one. There are indications that the example of the America will be followed on this side of the Atlantic, and the first step has taken in part of England, where every serious movement in the direction of the political process has its commencement, the manufacturing district of the north. Enfranchisement of women, part 2. We are continuing the article, and now here it goes. When, however, we ask why the existence of one half of the species should be merely ancillary to that of the other, why each woman should be a mere appendage to a man, allowed to have no interest of her own, that there may be nothing to compete in her mind with his interest and his pleasure, the only reason which can be given is that man like it. It's agreeable to them that man should live for their own sake, women for the sake of man, and the qualities and conduct in the subject which are agreeable to rulers, they succeeded for a long time in making the subjects themselves consider that as their appropriate virtue. Helvetius has met with much oblique for asserting that persons usually mean by virtue the quality which are useful of convenient to themselves. How truly this is said of mankind in general, and how wonderfully the idea of virtue set float by the powerful are caught and imbibed by those under their dominion, is exemplified by the manner in which the world was once persuaded that the supreme virtue of subject was loyalty to kings, and are still persuaded that the paramount virtue of womanhood is loyalty to men. Under a nominal recognition of a moral code common to both, in practice self-will and self-assertion form the type of what are designated as only manly virtue, while abnegation of self, patience, resignation and submission to power, unless when resistance is commanded by other interests than their own, have been stamped by general consent as preeminently the duties and graces required of women. The meaning being merely that power makes itself the center of moral obligations, and that a man likes to have his own will, but does not like that his domestic companion should have a will different from him. We are far from pretending that in modern and civilized times no reciprocity of obligations is acknowledged on the part of stronger. Such an assertion should be very wide for the truth. But even this reciprocity, which has disarmed tyranny, at least in the higher and middle classes, of its most revolting feature, yet when combined with the original evil of dependent conditions of women, has introduced in its turn serious evil. In the beginning and among tribes which are still in a primitive condition, women were the women and are the slaves of the man for purpose of toil. All the hard bodily labor devolved on them. The Australian savage is idle, while women painfully dig up the roots on which he lived. The American Indians, when he has killed a deer leaves it and it's send a woman to carry at home. In a state somewhat more advanced in Asia, women were and are the slaves of men for purpose of sensuality. In Europe, there are early succeeded a third and milder dominion, secured not by blows nor by locks and bars, but the sedulous inculcations on the mind, feeling also of the kindness and ideas of duty, such as superior rose to inferior under his protection, because more and more involved in the relation, but it did not for many ages become a regulation of companionship even between unequals. The lives of the two persons were apart. The wife was part of the furniture of the home, of the resting place to which the man returned from business or pleasure. His occupations were, as they still are, among men, among his equals. He was patriarch and the deposed within four walls, an irresponsible power, worshipping when not capriciously or brutally tyrannical. But if the moral part of his nature suffered, it was not necessary so in the same degree with the intellectuals or inactive portion. He might have as much vigor of mind and energy of the character as his nature enabled him, and his circumstances of his time allow he might write Paradise Lost or win the Battle of Marengo. This was the condition of the Greeks and Romans, and of the modern until a recent date. The relation with their domestic subordinates occupied a mere corner through a cherished one of their lives. Their education as men and formation of their character and faculties adapted mainly on a different class of influences. It is otherwise now. The progress of improvement has imposed in all possessors of the power and the domestic power among rest an increased and increasing sense of correlative obligations. No one now thinks that his wife has no claim upon his action but such as he may accord to her. All men of any conscience believe that their duty to their wife is one of the most binding of their obligation, nor it is supposed to consist solely in production, which in the present state of civilization women have almost ceased to need it. It involved care for their happiness and consideration of their wishes, with not unfrequent sacrifices of their own to them. The power of husband has reached the stage which the power of the king had arrived at when opinion did not yet question the rightfulness of arbitrary power, but in theory and to a certain extent it practice condemned the selfish use of it. This improvement in the moral sentiment of the mankind and increased sense of consideration due by every man to those who have no one but himself to look to has tended to make home more and more the center of interest, and domestic circumstances and society at large, and a large part of life and its pursuit and pleasure. The tendency has been strengthened by the chances of taste and manner which have so remarkably distinguished the rest 2 and 3 generations. In days known for distance, men found their excitement and filled up their time in violent bodily exercises, noisy merriment, and intemperance. They have now, in all but the very poorest classes, lost their inclination for those things, and the course of pleasure generally. They have now scarcely now taste but those which they have in common with women. And for the first time in the world, men and women are really companions. A most beneficial change if the companionship were between equals, but being between unequals, it produced what good observers have noticed through without perceiving its cause, a progressive deterioration among men in what had hitherto been considered the masculine excellences. Those who are so careful that women should not become men do not see that men are becoming what they have been decided that women should be, and are failing into the feebleness which they have so long cultivated in their companion. Those who are associated in their lifetime to become assimilated in character in the present closeness of associations between the sexes, men cannot remain mainly unless women require it. There is hardly any situation more unfavorable to the maintenance of elevation of character or force of intellect than to live in the society and seek by preference the sympathy of inferiors in mental endowment. Why? It is that we consistently see it in life so much of intellectuals and moral promise followed by such inadequate performance, but because the aspirant has compared himself only with those below himself and has not sought improvement or stimulus from meaning himself with equals or superior. In the present state of social life, this is becoming the general condition of men. They care less or less for any sympathies and are less and less under any person influenced but those of domestic roof. Not misunderstood, it is necessary that we should distinctly disclaim the belief that women are even now inferior in the intellects to men. There are women who are equal in intellects of any men or even live, and comparing ordinary women with ordinary men. The varied through pretty detail which compose the occupation of most women call forth probably as much of mental ability that of the uniform routine of pursuit which are habitual occupations of a large majority of men. It is from nothing in the faculties themselves but from the pretty subject and interest on which alone they are exercised that the common companionship of women such as their present circumstances make them so often exercise a dissolve when influence on high faculties and aspirations in men. If one of two has no knowledge and no care about the great ideas and purpose which dignify a life and about any of the practical concern, save personal interest and personal vanities, her conscious and still more her unconscious influence will exercise in rare case, reduced to a secondary place in his mind, if not entirely extinguish those interests which she cannot or does not share. Our argument here brings us into collision with what may be termed the moderate reformers of the education of women, a sort of person who, across the path of improvement on all great questions, those who would maintain the old and bad principles, mitigating their consequences. These says that women should be not slaves, not servant, but companion and educated for that office. But they do not say that men should be educated to be companion of women. But since uncultivated women are not suitable companions of cultivated men, and man who feel interest in things in above and beyond in the family circle wishes that his companion should be sympathized with him in this interest, and they therefore let women improve their understanding and taste, acquire general knowledge, civil, cultivate poetry, art, even conquest with science, and some strength their liberty so far as to say, inform themselves on politics not as pursued but sufficiently to feel an interest in the subject and to be capable of holding a conversation in there with the husband, or at least of understanding and imbibing his wisdom. Very agreeable to him, no doubt, but unfortunately the reverence of improving, it is from living intellectual communion only with those to whom we can lay down the law. So that for few men continue to advance beyond the first stage, the most eminent man cease to improve if they associated only with disciples. When they have overtopped those who immediately surround them, if they wish to further growth, they must seek for others of their own state to consort them. The mental companionship which is improving its common communion between active minds and not mere conduct between an active mind and a passive. This inestimable advantage is even now enjoyed when a strong-minded man and a strong-minded woman are by a rare chance united, and would be hard for oftener if education took the same point for strong-minded women, which it takes to prevent them from being formed. The modern and what are regarded as the improved and enlightened modes of education of women abjure as far as the word and education of mere show and professor to aim a solid construction, but means by the expression of superficial informations on solid subject, except accomplishment which are now generally regarded as to be taught well, if at all. Nothing is taught to women thoroughly. Small portions only of what is attempted to teach thoroughly to boys, are the whole of it is intended to or desire to teach to women. We make intelligent being is the power of thought. The stimuli which call forth that power are the interest and dignity of thoughts itself and field of its practical application. Both motives are cut off from those who are told from infancy that thought and all its greater applications are other people's business, while theirs is to make themselves agreeable to other people. High mental power in women will be but an exceptional accident until every career is open to them, and until they, as well as men, are educated for themselves and for the world, not one sex of the others. To what we have said on the effect of inferior position of women, combined with the present constitution of married life, we have thus far had in view only the most favorable cases, those in which there is some real approach to them, to that union and blending of characters and to live with which the theory of relation contemplates and its ideal standard. But if we look to the great majority of the cases, the effect of women legal inferiority on the character both of women and men must be painted in far darker color. We do not speak here for the gross brutalities, nor of the man power to seize on the woman's earnings or compel her to live with him against her will. We do not address ourselves to anyone who require to have its proof that these things should be remedied. We suppose average case in which there is neither complete union nor complete disunion of feeling and character, and we affirm that in this case the influence of the dependence on the women side is demoralizing to the character of both. The common opinion is that whatever may be the case with the intellectuals and moral influence of the women over man is almost very salutary. It is, we are often told, the great counteractive of selfishness. However, the case may be as to personal influence. The influence of the position tend eminently to promote selfishness. The most significant of man, the man who can obtain influence or consideration nowhere else, find one place where he is chief and head. There is one person often great his superior in understanding, who is obliged to consult him, whom he is not obliged to consult. His judge, magistrate, rule over their joint corner, arbiter of the differences between them, the justice and conscience to which are her appeal, must be made in his justice and conscience. It is his to hold the balance and adjust the scale between his own claim or wishes and those of another. This is now the only tribunal in civilized life in which the same person is judge and party. A generous mind in a situation makes the balance incline against its own side and give the other not less than more than in fair equality. Thus the weaker side may be enabled to turn the very fact of dependence into an instrument of power, and in default of justice take an undangerous advantage of generosity, rendering the unjust power to those who make an unselfish use of it, torment and burden but how it is when average men are invested with his power, without reciprocity, without responsibility, gives such a man the idea that he is first in law and opinion, and that to will is part and hers to submit. It is absurd to suppose that this idea merely glides over his mind, without sinking into it, having any effect on its feeling in practice. The propensity of making himself to the first subject of consideration, and other at the most and second, is not so rare as to wanting whether anything seems purposely arranged for encouraging its indulgence. If there is any self-will in the man has become either the conscious or unconscious deposed of his household, the wife indeed often succeeded in gaining her object, but it is by some of many various forms of indirectness and management. The Enfranchisement of Women. John Stuart Mill and Harriet Taylor Mill. That women have as good a claim as men have, in point of personal right, to the suffrage or to the place in the jury box, it would be difficult for anyone to deny. It cannot certainly be denied by the United States of America, as a people or as a community, that democratic institutions rest outwardly on the inherent right of everyone to a voice in the government. The Declaration of Independence, framed by the men who are still their great constitutional authorities, the document which has been from the first and is now the acknowledged basis of their polity, commerce, and with the express statement, we hold this truth to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable right, that among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, government are instituted among them, driving their just power from the consent of the government. So, the most significant point here we have to see that Harriet Taylor Mill is talking about the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are institutions among the men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. We do not imagine that any American Democrat will evade the force of these expressions by the dishonest or ignorant subterfuge that man in this memorable document does not stand for human being, but for one sex only, that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness are inalienable right for only one moiety of the human space, and that the enfranchisement of women. John Stuart Mill and Harriet Taylor Mill. That women have as good a claim as men have, in point of personal right, to the suffrage or to a place in jury box, it would be difficult for anyone to deny. It cannot certainly be denied by the United States of America, as a people or as a community, that democratic institutions rest outwardly on the inherent rights of everyone to a voice in the government. That Declaration of Independence, framed by the men who are still the great constitutional authorities, that document which has been from the first and is now the acknowledged basis of their polity, commerces, and express statement, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. We do not imagine that any American Democrat will enable the force of these expressions by the dishonest or ignorant subterfuge. That man in this memorable document does not stand for human being, but for one sex only, that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness are inalienable rights of only one moiety of the human species, and that the government, whose consent is confirmed to be the only secure source of just power, are meant for that half of mankind only, who in relation to the other have hitherto assumed the character of governors. The contradiction between principle and practice cannot be explained away. A like declaration of the fundamental maxim of their political creed has been committed by the Americans in the flagrant instance of the Negroes of this day are learning to recognize their turpitude. It was fitting that the man whose names will remain associated with the extirpation from the democratic soil of America of the aristocracy of color should be among the originators, for America and for the rest of the world, of the first collective protest against the aristocracy of sex, a distinction as accidental as that of color and fully as irrelevant to all questions of government. Not only to the democracy of America, the claim of women to the civil and political equality make an irresistible appeal, but also to those radicals and Chartists in the British Island and Democrats on the continent who claim what is called universal suffrage as an inherent right, unjust and oppressively withheld from them. For with what truth or rationality could be suffrage be termed universal while half of human species remain excluded from it? To declare that voice in the government is the right of all and demanded only for a part, the part namely to which the Clement himself belongs, is to renounce even the appearance of principle. The Chartist who denies the suffrage to the women is Chartist only because he is not a lord. He is one of those levelers who would level only down to themselves. Even those who do not look upon a voice in the government as a matter of personal right, nor profess principles which require that it should be extended to all, have usually traditional maxims of political justice with which it is impossible to reconcile the exclusion of all women from the common right of citizenship. It is an axiom of English freedom that taxation and representation should be coextensive. Even under the laws which give the wife's property to husband, there are many unmarried women who pay taxes. It is one of the fundamental doctrine of British Constitution that all persons should be tried by their peers. Yet women, whenever tried, are tried by male judges and male jury. To foreigners, the law according to privilege of claiming that half the jury should be composed of themselves, not so to women. Apart from the maxims of detail, which represent local and national rather than universal ideas, it is an acknowledged dictate of the justice to make no degradation distinction without necessity. In all things, the presumption ought to be on the side of equality. A reason must be given why anything should be permitted to one person and interdictated to another. But where that which is interdicted includes nearly everything which those to whom it is permitted most prize, and to be deprived of which they feel to be most insulting, when not only political liberty but personal freedom of action is the prerogative of a caste, when even in the exercise of industry almost all employments which task the high faculties in an important field which lead to distinction, riches or even pecuniary independence are fenced round as the exclusion domain of predominant section. Scarcely any door being left open to the dependent class, except such as all who can enter elsewhere disdainfully pass by miserable expediencies which are advance an excuse for so grossly partial a dispensation would not be sufficient, even if they were real, to render it other than a flagrant injustice, while for from being expedient, we are firmly convinced that the division of mankind into two castes, one born to rule over the other, is in this case, as in all cases, an unqualified mischief, a source of perversion and demoralization, both to the favored class and to those to whose expense they are favored, producing none of the good which is the custom to ascribe it to, forming a bar almost insuperable while it lasts to any vital improvement either in the character or in social condition of the human race. The proposition is now our purpose to maintain, but before entering on them, we would endure to dispel the preliminary objection, which in the mind of the person to whom the subword is new, are apt to prevent a real conscientious examination of it. The chief of these obstacles is the most formidable one. Custom. Women never have had equal rights with men. The claim in their behalf, the common rights of mankind, is looked upon as bared by universal practice. The strongest of prejudice, the prejudice against what is new and unknown, has indeed an age of chances like the present lost much of its force. If it has not, there would be little hope for prevailing against it. Over 3/4 of the habitable world, even at this day, the answer it has always been closed all discussion. But it is the boast of the modern Europeans and of their American kindred that they know and do many things which their forefathers neither knew nor did. And it is perhaps the most unquestionable point of superiority in the present above former ages, that habit is the tyrant it firmly was over opinion and modes of action, and that the worship of custom is a declining idolatry. An uncustomary thought on a subject which touches the greater interest of life still startled when first presented. But if it can be kept before the mind until the impression of the strangeness wear off, it obtains a hearing and rational a consideration as the intellect of hearer is accustomed to bestow on any other subject. In the present case, the prejudice of custom is doubtless on the unjust. Great thinkers indeed at different time, from Plato to Condorcet, besides some of the most eminent names of the present age, have made emphatic protest in favor of equality of women. There have been voluntary societies, religion or secular, of which the Society of Friends is most unknown, by whom that principle was recognized. But there has been no political community or nation in which, by law and uses, women have not been in a state of political and civil inferiority. In the ancient world, the same fact was alleged with equal truth on behalf of slavery. It might have been alleged in favor of the mitigated form of slavery, serfdom, all through the Middle Ages. It was urged against freedom of industry, freedom of conscience, freedom of the press. None of these liberties were thought compatible as well-ordered state until they had proved their possibility by actually existing as fact. That an institution or a practice is customary is no presumption of its goodness when any other a sufficient cause can be assigned for its existence. There is no difficulty in understanding why the subjection of women has been a custom. No other explanation is needed than physical force. That those who were physically weaker should have been made legally inferior. It is quite comfortable to the mode in which the world has been governed until very lately. The rule of physical strength was a general law of human affair. Throughout history, the nation's races, classes which found themselves the strongest, either in muscle, in riches, in military discipline, have conquered and held in subjection of the rest. Even if the rest most improved nations, the law of the sword is at the last discountenanced as unworthy. It is only since the culminated 18th century wars of conquest have only ceased since democratic revolution began. The world is very young and has just begun to cast off injustice. Those who are physically weaker should have made legally inferior. Is quite comfortable to the mode in which the world has been governed. Until very lately, the rule of physical strength was a general law of human affair. Throughout history, the nations, races, caste, which found themselves the strongest, either in muscles, in riches, or in military discipline, had conquered and held in subjection the rest. Even if the most improved nations, the law of the sword is at last discountenanced as unworthy. It is only since the culminated 18th century wars of conquer has only ceased since democratic revolutions began. The world is very young and has been just begun to cast off injustice. It is only now getting rid of monarchical despotism. It is only now getting rid of hereditary feudal nobility. It is only now getting rid of disabilities on the grounds of religion. It is only beginning to treat any man as citizen except the rich and favored portions of the middle class.